It is becoming clear to me, and I presume many others, that the ongoing trade war between Canada and the United States is essentially a media spectacle with significant real-life implications for workers and business owners across Canada. The media on both sides of the border are having a field day with this story, but they have quickly lost the forest for the trees, playing right into the Trump administration's hands and reporting on the trade war in an unnecessarily complicated manner. Now, perhaps I'm the only one who is confused about all of this, but I expect that many others are too. So in this video, I'm going to be making a timeline of the ongoing trade war between Canada and the United States and explain what tariffs are currently enforced and what is currently in place. Of course, this situation changes weekly, but I hope that this video can serve as a baseline. And I should say that this timeline will not include any of the annexation rhetoric from Donald Trump and any of the back and forth meetings, because in my opinion, all of that makes this situation far more confusing. We're just going to get right to the tariffs and the response and the pauses. I asked international trade lawyer and Professor David Collins, a former NAFTA trade dispute resolution panelist, to lay out what tariffs are currently being enforced against Canada from the United States. Here's what he had to say. Could you just outline for me the current tariffs that are being enforced against Canada by the United States? What's currently in place?
Well, the last time I checked, there was a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum. And there's, to my knowledge, I believe that is the only outstanding tariff that's currently in operation. The Liberation Day tariffs did not apply to Canada. Canada was left off that list. So to my knowledge, I believe that's all there is. There were some other tariffs that were imposed, but the USMCA products were exempt from that, which is quite, and that's quite comprehensive. So those are the tariffs that Canada is currently facing from the US.
But in order to get a full picture as to what is currently happening, we first have to go back to November of 2024. On November 25th, 2024, then President-elect Donald Trump wrote on Truth Social that on January 20th, as one of his first acts as president, he will impose a sweeping 25% tariff on all goods entering the United States from Canada and Mexico, citing concerns about fentanyl and illegal immigration. We then fast forward to January 20th, Inauguration Day for Donald Trump. Donald Trump did not sign the 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico as promised. He instead kicked it back a few days and told reporters that on February 1st, the 25% tariff on Canada will be put into force.
We're thinking in terms of 25% on Mexico and Canada because they're allowing vast numbers of people. Canada's a very bad abuser also. Vast numbers of people to come in and fentanyl to come in.
When do you think you would enact those?
I think February 1st.
Are you planning on giving notice of that?
I think we'll do it February 1st.
25% on both, sir?
Sir. On each.
On each,
yeah.
At this point, there was no discussion about CUSMA exemptions and about exemptions for separate industries. As far as we knew at this point in time, Canada was going to be hit with a baseline 25% tariff. February 1st, Donald Trump signs an executive order imposing a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods entering the United States and a separate 10% tariff on Canadian energy exports into the United States. Later that day, Justin Trudeau announced Canada's response.
Tonight, I am announcing Canada will be responding to the U.S. trade action with 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods.
25% tariffs on the U.S., targeting $30 billion worth of American goods, which would be applied on February 4th, and a further additional round of tariffs, targeting $125 billion worth of American goods, which would be enforced 3 weeks later. A total tariff response package of $155 billion. February 3rd, one day before tariffs are set to be enforced, after negotiations, Donald Trump backs down from his initial round of tariffs for 1 month after Canada announced further border spending and the appointment of a fentanyl czar. So at this point, by February 3rd, there are no tariffs on Canada, and there are no Canadian tariffs on America. But just a few days later, on February 10th, Donald Trump announces plans to put a 25% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum. That tariff is set to be implemented on March 12th. We fast forward a month to March 6th, following a meeting with the CEOs of Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis and significant public pressure against his planned tariffs on Canada. Donald Trump agrees once again to pause the 25% tariff on Canadian goods and the 10% tariff on Canadian energy if the products are CUSMA compliant. So at this point, if you are a Canadian business and you are exporting goods that are non-CUSMA compliant, you will be hit with a 25% tariff. 6 days later, on March 12th, the US imposes and enforces the steel and aluminum tariffs on Canada. In response, Canada immediately imposes tariffs totaling $29 billion on American goods. So on March 12th, steel and aluminum tariffs are in place, and Canada's response is in place. We then fast forward to March 26th. Donald Trump announces a proclamation which will impose a 25% tariff on all imported vehicles into the United States, exempting CUSMA compliant vehicles and only targeting non-US content in CUSMA compliant vehicles. A further announcement saying that a 25% tariff on auto parts is set to come into force no later than May 3rd. So on March 26th, the auto tariffs that are imposed by the United States on Canadian vehicles are exempting CUSMA compliant cars and only putting a tariff on the non-US made content in those cars. This brings us up to April 2nd, Liberation Day in America, as Donald Trump calls it. The Liberation Day reciprocal tariff announcement exempts Canada and Mexico. And at this point in time, all CUSMA compliant goods are tariff-free. So by Liberation Day, April 2nd, what Canadians were looking at was a situation in which steel and aluminum tariffs were in place and non-US made content of CUSMA compliant vehicles that enter the US from Canada are being tariffed at 25%. Energy exports from Canada into the United States that are non-CUSMA compliant are being tariffed at 10%. But besides steel and aluminum and US content of cars manufactured in Canada, all trade that was already tariff-free under the CUSMA agreement remains tariff-free. We fast forward to April 9th. Canada's counter tariffs on auto imports from the United States take effect, and it's very similar. There is a 25% tariff on all non-CUSMA compliant vehicles from the United States and a 25% tariff on non-Canadian and non-Mexican content of CUSMA compliant fully assembled vehicles from America. And that brings us where we are today. There are 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum, and there is a pre-existing 14.5% tariff on softwood lumber that was put into force by the Biden administration. That is the current state of play. Besides all of the talk, the threatening of annexation, the back and forth meetings, and the different articles that you may be reading, as far as I can tell, that is the current state of play when it comes to tariffs. And of course, the situation is set to change quickly. But this is already having a serious impact on workers. 500 workers at the GM plant in Ingersoll, Ontario have been laid off. The Stellantis plant in Windsor, which employs over 3,000 people, has shut down for 2 weeks, putting hourly workers out of a job. I spoke with John Dagnolo, the president of the Unifor Local 200 in Windsor. He tells me that if auto tariffs come into full force, including on auto parts, that most auto plants in Canada will have to shut down. How many job losses are predicted, not just in Windsor, but in the entire auto sector, if these tariffs go into full force?
Well, it all depends if the company's going to eat it or not. So it also depends on, in May 3rd, he's going to announce tariffs again, and it could be on the parts facilities. So if that becomes full force, I think they'll shut down. I don't think they'll be able to operate. Can't tariff, like between Mexico and Canada, the amount of plants, parts facilities that supply the parts. So think about this. I have well over 1,000 parts in an engine. Now, some We have some that are built here, the parts, some are built in China, some are built in Mexico. We have parts that are built in Brazil to our engine. So you think about all those parts being tariffed, now the engine gets that much bit more. Those parts facilities, how are they going to survive? The margins are very small. 5% margins, and they get tariffed 25%, they won't be able to operate. So the company will then have to call all the suppliers to say, hey, are you going to be able to survive if they tariff 25%? And they're going to say no, because they can't. And then the company's going to have to support them. So not only are they going to have these tariffs, they're going to have every supplier, and there are so many of them, they'll have to make sure they can build the part in the engine so they can have a truck. So these are some examples where it could shut down the Ford Motor Company almost immediately.
At the center of this ongoing trade war is the debate around free trade. Is free trade good for Canada, or is it bad for Canada? It depends on who you ask. Professor David Collins makes the case for free trade. Why is free trade good for Canada?
Look, Canada could be an economic superpower, and I don't want to sound like a politician because I'm not one, but this is an obvious thing to I think to Canadians that are aware of what's going on in their countries. This is a country with abundant natural resources, and it's becoming only stronger in that regard as the world warms and more agricultural land in Canada's Arctic becomes available, and you have the Arctic archipelago opening up for trade. It has a young, dynamic workforce and abundant natural resources. Canada could be a superstar. It needs to loosen up the regulations, embrace free markets, get rid of that ridiculous carbon taxes, and get rid of the intra-provincial trade barriers to get the economy stimulating. Canada could thrive as an international trading partner.
But for John Dagnolo and the auto workers of Windsor, it's an entirely different story. What do you make of how free trade has impacted the auto industry?
We've always been against, we believe in fair trade.
Right.
Right? This is about fair trade. We've always said that. Did free trade hurt us? Of course it did. A lot of our jobs went to Mexico. A lot of our jobs went to China. And we always argued it's got to be fair trade. So when you think about markets, especially other companies that are selling vehicles here that don't make a thing, and they're taking their money back, and they're not investing in Canada. I always said that, we have to talk to those type of companies because it's now an unfair advantage. They get to build in another country, sometimes cheaper, and then sell it for cheaper. And it hurts both North Americans, including China. I get why you need to tariff China because they don't have the same trade rules. I get that. It's not fair trade. And so, of course, you need to look at China differently because they don't follow the same rules as we do. But fair trade, free trade, I don't believe in it.
Right.
Because it's not free. There's a lot of people's livelihoods on the line when it comes to these trade agreements. And we had an agreement with that Donald Trump signed, and unfortunately he doesn't like it now, calls it the worst trade agreement ever. But 99% of it was tariff-free. So you couldn't even, and when it comes to manufacturing, there's no advantage in Canada. There wasn't. And to see that we still have these tariffs on our country blows my mind away.
I asked my followers on X if they were confused about the current tariff and trade war with the United States, and the majority of respondents said yes. I think that's a sentiment shared by most Canadians. It's just not clear what is actually going on here. And I have to think that the confusion and uncertainty that so many Canadians are experiencing right now is intentional on the part of the United States. The confusion is part of the trade strategy. But hopefully this video and this timeline helped to clear some of that confusion up. Now, if you enjoyed this video, you know the drill. Please subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it. It will really help me reach more people. Also, let me know in the comments section what stories you would like to see me report on next. But until then, thank you for watching.